Hey guys, this is part 2 of a podcast about hunting in wet weather. We're picking up right where we left off, so if you want to hear the whole thing and get a breakdown of moisture management strategies and the different types of rain shells that I would recommend for hunting, make sure to check out the previous episode. With that, let's get back to the show. Let's talk for a moment about breathable waterproof membranes. For breathable waterproof membranes to work, you have to have a humidity and a heat difference on the different sides of the jacket. So the idea with Gore-Tex, which is kind of the grandfather of all these different breathable membranes, is that on the inside of the jacket, there's some heat buildup. And so the water turns to vapor, and the vapor is able to go through the porous material of the Gore-Tex. But water droplets on the outside can't get in. And so this is a great idea because if you think, okay, I'm hiking, I'm building up some heat, and therefore the water moisture, the water vapor from inside the jacket is going to be pushed out of the jacket. And that's going to keep me more dry than if the water on the inside just couldn't escape. Well, the secret with breathable clothing is that even the materials that are marketed as breathable are not that breathable. And if you have high humidity on the outside of the rain jacket, or you have lots of rain, lots of water on the outside of the rain jacket, it makes this process become much less efficient, if not impossible. So you can actually get to a place where if your face fabric is wet enough, say your jacket's starting to wet out, the transfer of moisture from inside the jacket to outside of the jacket is going to slow down or even stop. In some ways, it can't really be waterproof and breathable at the same time. I learned this from a YouTube channel online called My Outdoor Life when I was researching for this podcast. You should go look up his videos and see what he says about breathable membranes because he really explains this concept and why in some ways these breathable membranes don't do what they promise to do. So you just want to keep that in mind when you're shopping for a rain jacket, is that some jackets are going to be more breathable, but you can't really call any rain jacket supremely breathable without actual venting. The jackets that are using a breathable material at best are going to be breathable when it's not super wet and humid, which is great. And they're also going to be waterproof when it is super wet and humid. And so those things are good qualities to have. It's just you can't expect to be in a rainstorm making an effort, say hiking up a big hill, and feel completely dry. There's just nothing that can really give you that capability. Now, rain shells are not the only options for keeping the rain out. You could also use something like a soft shell jacket. You could use a poncho, or not really clothing, but you could even use an umbrella. If there was one thing that could keep you dry while you're walking up a hill, it might be an umbrella. An umbrella isn't really practical for most hunting scenarios because you often need to use your hands. You might be able to find a scenario where it's helpful, but generally I'm going to rule an umbrella out for hunting. Now, a soft shell jacket, unlike a rain shell, is going to have a soft to the touch, synthetic, often stretchy fabric, face fabric. And those are not going to be completely waterproof, but they can be water resistant. So if you only have a little bit of rain or you're planning to be active during the whole time you're out in the rain, a soft shell is not necessarily a bad idea because when you're generating body heat, that will help evaporate moisture off of your jacket. And if it's just light rain and maybe it comes and goes, your soft shell is going to be able to dry out throughout the day. So a soft shell, you can definitely use one. You may not need a rain jacket, just depending on where you are and what the conditions are. You could also use a poncho. A poncho is going to be just like a big piece of plastic that is fitted to go over you and even over your equipment. And I don't think these are super helpful for when you're actually trying to hunt because they can get in the way. They can be loud. If there's any wind, you're going to have to deal with that poncho flapping. But they could be a good sort of backup or emergency piece of equipment because you can use them to help make emergency shelters. And if you really just need to stay dry and you're going to stay in one place, putting a poncho on over everything else isn't a bad idea. So I wouldn't consider them as a great first option, but they may be a good backup option for any time when you just need to be dry and hunting or your other activity isn't so much of a priority. Okay, so we've talked about rain shells and a few alternative options for rain gear, like soft shell jackets or ponchos. There's definitely other types of rain gear out there, but I think these are the most applicable to hunting, and usually a 2.5 or 3-layer rain jacket is going to be your best bet. Let's talk about some different features that your rain gear might have. There's a handful that you should just go down the list and check and kind of see if you like them or not. You're going to check and make sure it has waterproof seams and zippers. You might look at the durable water repellent finish, the DWR that it has. Make sure that that's something that seems good. Some of these durable water repellents have forever chemicals in them, known as PFAS, PFAS. And those are really nasty and not good for humans. So you might want to check and see that your jacket doesn't have those. You'll also want to look at the drawstrings and cuffs and see if those make sense to you and see if those would work for you. It's really just kind of personal preference. It's nice to have a drawstring around the waist so you can cinch it up and stay a little more watertight that way, or keep a jacket, an insulation layer jacket, up underneath your rain shell. And then cuffs with Velcro or something that cinches down a little bit is nice to also keep your insulation layers from getting wet. You'll take a look at the pockets. Some rain gear is going to have actual pockets, where other rain jackets and rain pants are going to have zippers that open up and then it goes into your inside the jacket or inside the pants, and you can access your pockets on your other clothing. So again, that's just personal preference. Sometimes it's nice to have a chest pocket that you can put keys in. I like on my rain pants have big zips that I can just unzip and then put my hand in my actual pocket. And that's pretty nice because oftentimes I'm starting my hunt out without my rain gear on. If you're buying rain pants specifically, it's a good idea to check the lower leg and see if they have zippers or some sort of snap system. If you're wearing hiking boots, it's almost impossible to get pants on over your boots. So it's really nice to have a way to open up the leg of the rain pants so you can slide them over your boots without having to take your boots off in wet weather. So these features are all pretty standard or basic. Just check for them on the rain gear you buy and make sure they align with your personal preferences. There are some features, though, that I think are a lot more important. You should really pay attention to the fit, hood design, venting, and then the packability and weight. So with fit, you want to think about how this jacket can go over your other insulation layers. And if you think about it, you may need a bigger jacket for some of your outdoor activities than you might need for around town. If you're trying to put this rain shell on over a big down jacket or a synthetic jacket or a fleece, something that traps a lot of air and is a little bit more bulky, you're going to need a larger jacket to be able to completely cover your other insulation layers. Or you may just want a jacket that's big enough to give you some room to move around, even with multiple layers on, right? You also want to think about the fact that a trim fit can actually accumulate more moisture because there's less airflow on the inside of the jacket. So if you get a jacket and it's cut really close to your body, it may feel less breathable than a jacket that has a bit more of a loose fit. And that airflow can actually help with the transfer of moisture through that breathable membrane if you have a jacket with Gore-Tex or something similar. When you're checking the fit, you also might want to take a look at the length and see how long that is. If you're sitting down and glassing for a long time, it's nice to have a longer jacket, especially in the back, so you can sit down and not get wet. One part of fit that is really important is the hood design. So if you have different insulation layers that have hoods, you want to make sure that your rain jacket fits over those well. I noticed with a rain jacket that I have that I can't fit the hood completely over the hood of one of my down jackets. That's a little bit disappointing because if I got stuck out in a rainstorm and I was wearing my down jacket to stay warm while I was glassing, I would have to tuck the hood of my down jacket away so it wasn't soaking up rain in the places where it's not covered by my rain jacket hood. My rain jacket hood overall is just kind of a bad design. It's not deep enough, and it's nice so you can have awareness and peripheral vision, but in the event of real rain, the hood's not deep enough to actually keep the rain from getting in my hair or in my face or even down my neck. So you want to look at the hood design, make sure it's something that works for you, fits you well. A lot of hoods are made with a drawstring to tighten it up, which is nice. Some hoods will say that they're designed to accommodate a helmet for climbers, and that can also be helpful for hunters when you're wearing, say, a ball cap and a beanie or a different hood and you just need some extra hood volume. Maybe the number one feature I would recommend for rain gear is venting. Having some vents on your rain jacket or your rain pants gives you more control over moisture and heat. And this can be really helpful. There's all this talk about breathability and is this jacket more breathable than that jacket? But having some vents is a surefire way to be able to reduce the amount of heat that you have in your rain jacket, therefore reduce the amount that you may sweat, and also just dump that hot, moist air from pit zips or from zips down your leg. And it's just a great way to be able to control that moisture while you're hiking. One thing I like about vents is that it reduces the number of times that you need to take your jacket or your pants on or off. So I've got some First Light Boundary Storm Tight rain pants. I think that's what they're called. And you can unzip the whole length of the pant. And what I found is that when I need to wear them, it's nice to be able to zip those open when I'm walking around. And then as soon as I stop, if I need to have some extra warmth or I need to keep the rain off, I just zip those right back up. And that way I don't have to take them off every time I start moving, or I don't have to take them off repeatedly and then put them back on. But I can unzip and not overheat quickly the way I would if I had rain pants that just didn't vent at all. So you can use these zippers strategically, and I think they just make so much sense. They're often put down the side of your jacket, so underneath your armpits, where they're a little bit protected by your arm and shoulder. And I think that's just one of the best features that you could have on a rain jacket. The zippers will add a little bit of weight, so if you're counting ounces, you may opt for something that doesn't have zippers, and that's up to you, but I think generally they're well worth it. The last features you'll want to look at are packability and weight. These are really more important to backpack hunters and people who are going to hunt for multiple nights in a row. But having something that is easily packable, especially if you're not going to be living in your rain gear, it's really nice to be able to pack it away and stuff it down in your bag and not have to worry about it until it starts to rain. Some of those 2-layer or those heftier 3-layer rain jackets are not going to be that packable, and they could add a lot of extra weight. And if you end up going on a hunting trip and it doesn't even rain, you're going to be kicking yourself and even thinking about leaving your rain jacket the next time you go out. But if you have something that's nice and packable, like a 2.5 layer rain jacket or a lighter weight 3-layer rain jacket, you'll be happy to have that extra protection, and it's not going to take up a whole lot of room or weight in your backpack. Let's move into our final section here and talk a little bit about layering. Like I've said before, you are likely going to get wet if you are out in wet weather, whether it's through sweat and perspiration or just moisture from your body, or it's from the rain. You're likely to get a little bit wet. So that makes layering so much more important, because if you get wet, you can get cold, and getting cold can be dangerous. So you need to wear clothing that will stay somewhat warm even when you're wet, and also preferably dry out quickly. Cotton, like we've talked about, is not a good option. Instead, you want to opt for something like synthetics or wool. Personally, I don't like synthetics that much because of the microplastics issue, which I think we've talked about before, and also because synthetics get stinky very easily. So add in a little bit of wetness and synthetics can start to smell on you pretty quickly. So there are some synthetics out there that are designed to be less smelly, but generally I like to avoid them when I can. If you're trying to get the material that is going to dry out the fastest, though, after getting wet, synthetics take the cake. They're just going to dry out better than wool, or definitely than cotton. A natural alternative to synthetics is wool. Wool will stay somewhat warm when it gets wet, and it will dry out much faster than cotton. It's going to be heavier than synthetic material, and when it gets wet, it's going to be heavier because it's going to retain more water, and it's not going to dry out as fast as synthetic material, but it is natural. It does a very good job of regulating temperature, and it won't have that smell issue that synthetics do. Another material to think about is down. Down is not a good insulator in wet weather because once down gets wet, it will start to lose its loft and therefore lose its warmth potential. There are a lot of down jackets these days that are made with hydrophobic down, which is down that has been coated in something that helps it repel water. So if you are going to wear a down jacket in wet weather or in a place where it could rain a lot, you may choose something that has that hydrophobic down instead of just untreated down. So the way you layer is going to depend on what activity you're doing or what activity level you're doing and what the weather is actually like. And this isn't too complicated, but I just want to spell it out for you if you're not familiar with it. And we'll just go through a couple different scenarios. So let's say you need to move and you're moving in wet weather. And let's say there's moderate rain and the temperatures are varying from 45 to 55 degrees. So cold, but not frigid, right? In this sort of weather, you may get away with just some base layers, merino wool or synthetic, take your pick, and some rain gear. And hopefully your rain gear has some vents so that when you're moving, you can control the heat and the moisture inside of your rain jacket. But you may find that when you're hiking, you really don't need that much insulation to stay warm, especially with a rain shell on. If you need some extra warmth, then you could put on a mid-weight quarter zip or a mid-weight hoodie, something synthetic to go over your base layers and help you just retain a little bit more heat. If you need to move in the same temperatures but in light rain, you may find that you don't even need a rain shell. You could use just your base layers plus a soft shell or even a fleece jacket, a synthetic fleece. And in this situation, you're kind of just accepting that you're going to get wet, but you know that since you're moving and creating some body heat, you're going to be okay. You're going to stay warm enough. If the rain stops, some of that water is going to dry off your soft shell or your fleece or whatever you're wearing. And since you're wearing some synthetic layers, it's going to be able to dry out quickly. And so you're just kind of making a call based on what the weather is like. Now, let's say you need to stop moving. If you're hunting, this is pretty common. Maybe you've reached your glassing point and you need to stop and spend a long time sitting and looking. Well, in this case, you just want to throw on an insulation layer in between your base layer and your rain shell. This could be a synthetic puffy. This could be a fleece jacket. This could be a midweight, quarter zip and then a fleece jacket and then your rain shell, just depending on how cold you are. You could even throw a down jacket on in between your base layer and your rain shell if you have a rain shell that can really keep your down jacket protected. And when you're staying still, you don't have to worry as much about that moisture on the inside of your rain jacket building up and compromising your down. So if you're going to stay still, just throw on some extra insulation and try to get under some shelter as well. This could mean getting under some dry trees. This could mean getting just out of the direct wind and rain with a topographical feature. This also might mean that you've brought a tarp and you set it up with your trekking poles. And I know I mentioned a tarp earlier, but I really think this is a good idea. If you're in a climate where you're likely to get lots of rain, maybe just plan on bringing a tarp and kind of integrating that as part of your rain gear system. If you think of bringing a rain jacket kind of as protection, a tarp is a whole additional layer of protection, and it really could make a big difference in your comfort level and even your safety when you're out in the backcountry. Besides your base layers, your synthetic or wool insulation layers, and your rain shell, there's a couple other clothing items that are really helpful in the rain. The first one is a brimmed hat. It's just so much nicer to have a brim, whether it's like a outdoorsman cowboy hat style or if it's just a ball cap style. Having that brim is so nice when you're walking around just to keep rain out of your eyes. And it also helps when you're glassing to keep rain out of your eyes when you're trying to look through binoculars or a spotting scope. When it's wet, you'll also want to bring an extra pair of socks. I always bring an extra pair of socks just in case one of my pairs gets wet, but it's especially important in rainy weather to have an extra pair of socks that can stay dry so that if your feet get wet, you can switch those out and not have to be walking around with extremely wet feet all day. I like to wear some neoprene gloves in wet weather. They'll often get completely soaked through, but they still offer a little bit of warmth and protection when they're on my hands. Sometimes I'll take them off and then they get cold and then they're not that helpful. So some sort of glove that works for you, but I found that neoprene does work decently well in wet weather as long as I keep them warm. Finally, you want to think about your boot selection when you're going out to hike and hunt in the rain. You've kind of got two main options, and that would be rubber boots, tall rubber boots, or Gore-Tex lined boots. So tall rubber boots would be like your extra tough boots or your muck boots. And these would be really for situations where you're going to be walking through a lot of wet vegetation or even flooded or swampy areas. And those paired with some good rain pants could help to keep a lot of rain out. On the other hand, you have Gore-Tex lined leather or synthetic boots. And this is actually a place where Gore-Tex works really well because if you think about it, you're always creating friction in the boot and creating some heat in there. And so you're actually creating sort of the ideal conditions to help move moisture from the inside of the boot outside through that liner. You can also, with leather boots, apply Nikwax or Snow Seal on the outside to help water bead up more. And there are products like that for synthetic boots as well. And that just creates one extra layer between you and the wet ground and brush. One last thing I should mention here, gaiters can be very helpful in wet conditions. I actually did a whole episode on gaiters. If you don't know what they are, go check out episode 15. They're great for hunting. I wear them spring bear hunting and often in snow, and they can sometimes be a good option for rainy conditions as well. So if you want to learn more about those, go check out episode 15 called Gaiters for Hunting. All right, guys. Well, I hope this was helpful for you. When it comes down to it, what you choose for your rain gear is really dependent on your trip. How long you're going to be out there, what the weather's like, how much moving around you're planning to do, all of that. But hopefully this podcast has given you some ideas of what you're looking for and some ideas of how to better manage moisture in the field. All this stuff has been on my mind as we head into spring and the weather turns from cold and dry to cold and wet. I've been wearing subpar rain jackets for the last couple of years just because I haven't cared to spend the money on better ones. And it's kind of got me thinking about upgrading my rain jacket before setting out after bears this spring. It's kind of a funny story, actually. Last year, I was wearing this hunting jacket that I got as a kid, and it's sort of a rain jacket. It's a shell of sorts. It would kind of fit in the 2-layer rain jacket category because it has a face fabric and a mesh liner, right? And it's camo. So I wear it a lot when I don't need much extra warmth, but I want the camo. And it's just a decent outer layer. Well, I was wearing this jacket last spring bear hunting one day, and it wasn't too cold, but it was just raining consistently for a couple of hours. And I didn't have time to wait it out, so I was just hiking in the rain, and pretty soon I noticed my arms were completely wet. That clammy feeling of wet synthetic against your skin. In the arms, the liner stopped, so it's just my arms next to the shell fabric, and I was just getting soaked. At the time, I just assumed that it was my sweat and moisture getting trapped, but I was really wet, and that's what started me thinking about finding a better system for wet weather. Well, this was all turning around in my head, but it wasn't until the fall season when I was out elk hunting and the temperatures dropped from 70 degrees during the day to 45 degrees during the day with a giant rainstorm that I realized that this jacket that I was wearing just wasn't waterproof. I finally tested it and it soaked through in under a minute. So I don't know if it was more waterproof in the past or if it's always been this way, but I felt really silly, and I'm glad I realized that before getting caught backpacking or in a more serious situation without proper rain gear. So that's actually a good segue into what I want to talk about to wrap up. When you're thinking about rain gear and hunting in wet weather, always keep safety in mind. With the right rain gear and layering system, you can make it through many scenarios that would otherwise leave you cold and exposed. Moderate rain and moderate temperatures, no problem. Get out and hunt. But in continual or heavy rain, even the best rain gear may not be enough to keep you dry. Paired with frigid temperatures, this can quickly lead to a dangerous situation. So consider your gear, your capability, your experience, and your options for getting dry before choosing to hunt in truly inclement weather. Sometimes finding shelter may be the best decision to keep you alive and help you hunt another day. That's all for today, guys. Thanks so much for listening. Stay dry, or at least don't get too wet, and I'll catch you next week.